Hello and welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. As the title to this video implies, how good can $50 precision machined rings really be? Well, it turns out they can be really, really good. Why don't you come on in a little bit closer and let me show you why. That's right, $50. These are claimed to not only be precision machined, but hand lapped. You could already see the finish through this box. And that's the first place that we have to start. The box in this thing is quite nice. You pick this up, you know exactly what diameter, exactly what height, and you can see exactly what it's going to look like from the outside. It's a beautiful presentation and truly something to behold. This is a very elegant solution that we typically don't see in some ring manufacturers. Cracking this box open, and you are blessed with what I find to be absolutely beautiful rings. Comes with an install tool and spare screws. I'm going to remove one of these for you, which, as you can see, even the box itself is very precisely made because they slip on perfectly. I'm going to leave the spare screws in there, but I am going to remove, I believe, the T20 or T25 Torx driver so I can remove the cap for all of you. But first, let's just take a real close look at this. Just look at the bore inside there. That is gorgeous. It feels like glass. Both the top and the bottom are wonderful. You might see a couple marks in there, but that's already because I have tested these on my tracking setup to see if they will return to zero. So I know exactly how well these things are going to perform. And boy howdy, ladies and gentlemen, these are wonderful. Enough beating around the bush. To be full disclosure, Discovery Optics did send these in to me, just like they sent in the Gen 1 3 to 15 and the 5 to 25. They also just sent in their Gen 2 5 to 25, which is a massive step forward from the Gen 1. The reason why they keep on sending me stuff is because they really like my brutal, honest approach to things. I tell them like it is. The contact that I have with them is one of my Patreon providers, and he says they love how honest you are with everything because it drives them forward. It makes them make a better product, and they appreciate that a lot. And I appreciate them for wanting to continue to do business with me. They send these in for me and say, give me an honest review, and that's what I put out for all of you. So when I say that already these are magnificent for 50 bucks, these truly are magnificent. But let me show you why. First off, a little bit of a backstory. These cost about $20 to produce. That sounds like a lot of money if you are familiar with the manufacturing process. And that's because they are a lot of money. From what I was told from my contact, the lesser quality Vortex rings usually cost about $5 to $6 to make. These are $20, and they're both made in China. But these are 4 to 5 times the cost. And we'll touch on why they're so much more expensive. Don't confuse the Vortex rings for the precision rings. No, these are made by Seekins. These are made in the US, but these are well over $100. In fact, they've gone up to like almost 150 bucks from some spots. These are magnificent rings, but if you're on a tighter budget, something like this might do more than enough for you and your setup. If you want to buy something that's American made, I highly recommend the Vortex precision rings or the Seekins precision rings because these are truly wonderful. I'm going to leave that off to the side because I'm going to do a weight comparison very soon. But we're talking about these rings. They cost about $20 to produce, but you can buy them for about $50. And that doesn't sound like great economics. You want to maximize profits. Rightfully so. Who knows, maybe after this video drops, they'll increase the price to $70, in which I still think that they would be worth it. But why are they $20 to produce when other rings are lesser expensive? Well, it's not just the design of these rings and how and the attention to detail that they spent on all of these components. I mean, everything on this is wonderful, but it's just how many steps and processes that they did during the manufacturing process. So not only do they take a big chunk of 7075 aluminum, which is a very high grade of aluminum, it's more dense and it's stronger than 6061. Thus, you can get a much finer finish like this when you do bore out the inside and even polish it. It will hold a better edge, but it's also much stronger, so you don't have to worry about stripping out the threaded holes when you torque these things down. but it's also much more expensive than 6061. So that's one of the reasons for the cost. Another thing is they machine this, then they go and someone has to go and put the cap on the base, torque it down, then they bore it again. Then, as you can see, they serialize the base and the cap as one unit. If I pull out the second one, you will see it's a different number. Well, it's the same number, but an A side and a B side. This way you know that when you're putting these together, if you accidentally mix up the caps, you know you have a precision ring and a precision ring that are cloned to one another. These are as accurate to one another as possible. I brought a slide veneer in just to see if I could measure it out, but from my testing so far, and you'll see it very soon too, these things are dead nuts perfect. Another thing I really appreciate is the type of fastener that they use. These are a very wide head and they have a very wide flat bottom. And the wide flat bottom is going to mean that it's going to have hopefully more even surface pressure when you actually torque it down onto the cap into the mount. Look at that. Beautiful. Big fat wide head, big flat bottom, almost no, well there is a radius in the inside or else it would snap, but there's a very small radius. It takes up very little space. Another thing I really appreciate is that they use the same screws for both the cap and the locking claw. So you use one tool for everything. Some manufacturers don't do that, and I don't know why. Is it cost? Is it they're trying to minimize how much threads are in somewhere? I don't really know. I'm sure you can come up with a million excuses, or if you know, please let me know in the comment section below. But I love to see uniformity like this, because one tool does everything you will possibly need on this setup. I'm going to increase the brightness of my camera a little bit so it's a little bit easier for you guys to see what I'm talking about. But here is the claw. There's not a whole lot to it, but it's really nicely finished. There's a couple of little burrs on the inside of that hole, but those holes really do nothing because when this is set up like so, it lines up basically perfectly with the threaded holes on the bottom. But this is perfectly fine. You can see there's a recessed hole on the inside, so this way the head doesn't stick too far out. It flushes it up quite nicely. Again, these screws are really nice, and it's nice that they also include 2 extra screws for you in case you lose one of these, or if you end up breaking one, it doesn't suck as much. Starting at the bottom of the ring, you can already see the marks from where I had this on a pick rail, and you can see that they look fairly even, one or top to bottom, left to right, which is a good sign because it means that pressure is being evenly loaded on top of the pick rail. Holes on the side are not helicoiled because 7075 is much stronger than 6061. The likelihood of you stripping these out is much lower, especially if you use a proper spec torque wrench and you torque it accordingly, which if you are curious about the torque settings, 30 inch-pounds for the bottom and the top are claimed 20 inch-pounds. So use that obviously as your maximum reference guide and you shouldn't have any problems. So finishing up, they put this together, they torque it down, they bore it out, I'm sure that they check it in between that, they clean it, then they serialize it, then they manually pack it, and you're done. There's a lot more steps as opposed to just machining this, machining that, anodizing everything, throwing it together, and then shipping it out. And it's the manpower that's in this that makes these rings cost as much as they do on their end, on the manufacturing end. But they don't implement those costs, those charges to you, the consumer, which is really, really nice. That's something I really do appreciate. One way that they are allowed to make these as precise as possible is little guide pins. Very little play once they are mated. There has to be a little bit of play. If these are too tight, this will lock up and then you'll never be able to take it off. But it's really awesome that that's it, it's lined up. You know that this is going to be as concentric as possible once it's on the scope and you're about to torque it down. Really nice attention to detail. I also like that the through holes, well, the holes are through holes. So this way, if you do break a screw, you can get in from the bottom and push it up. Not only that, look at that. They milled out the bottom pockets so that they're flat as opposed to being at an angle. That means that when the tap comes through this, hopefully it won't cut more on one side and then either cause the hole to not be perfectly straight, or it won't break the tool as frequently. And again, if you did have to put this on a drill press and drill through it, you have a nice flat surface to indicate off of. And that's another thing you have to consider. Tool wear. Tool wear is a very real thing. Aluminum might be soft, but it is quite abrasive, so it does remove the fine edge of cutting tools if you are doing a lot of machining with it. And 7075 is much more, and 7075 is harder than 6061, so it will cut down on tool life considerably, and that's another expense that they have to why these are $20 to produce as opposed to, even half that, even $10. That's a huge profit loss if you start factoring that in. They make 10,000 rings at even a $10 a piece. It's $100,000. That is not an insignificant amount of money by any stretch of the imagination. But on top, on the cap, they have nice little cuts. You can see the imprint from the cap of the screw on the cap on the anodizing, and on all four corners, it looks like it is wearing in beautifully. That was when I torqued it down on the scope already. I wanted to do this after I had already done my tracking portion of the video because I wanted to see all of these little marks and see how it would actually look after the fact, not before. There is a bit of a mark right here in the middle, but I did have this on my fairly beat up SWFA 16X, so it could have just been imperfection on the tube because that tube is, at this point, fairly beat up. Focusing on the bottom, again, we already have those flat edges over there. Through holes, fantastic. No through holes on the bottom because that would be a really long tapping process, and the likelihood of breaking a tap is very high. Even in a blind hole, it's fairly high, but they're only tapped in there probably about 8 to 10 millimeter, I'd say. One big locking lug in the middle. Again, good contact on the pick rail from the wear marks that you can see. The anodizing on this is pretty good. It's not the nicest that I've seen, but again, for the price, I will not complain about that. I love that they factored in all these little areas where they could remove material either to make the machining process better for them or just to lighten the ring as much as possible. Even on top, they didn't have to do these relief cuts on there, but they did. Speaking of weight, let us compare. Where is it? I believe this is a 35 millimeter high. What's the model number? HX11315. You can look that up, but I'm pretty sure this is a 35 millimeter high or extra high Vortex precision ring. That comes in at 2.5 ounces. And this 30 millimeter low ring feels actually heavier, but it's exactly the same weight. So they did try to save some weight as much as possible, but keep in mind 7075 is a denser material, so thus it's going to be heavier. So despite the fact that there is a significant height difference between these two and overall diameter difference, they're the exact same weight. But let's face facts, people. You don't buy precision rings to build a super lightweight rig. You buy precision rings because they're going to be precise and made well, and hopefully hold to zero and not damage your scope. So far, these seem to be made really, really well. So I don't mind that they have a little heft to them. They feel really substantial in hand, and that's all I could really ask for. Now, I unfortunately only have a slide veneer, but I'm very curious to see what I'm going to get from the base, top of the base to the bottom of the ring itself. Looks like 371.2, so about 372 on that one. And let's try to get this in the same location. 372. A little hard for you guys to pick that up with the light. Very hard for me to see it this far away. But as near as makes no difference, they are identical, at least on a slide veneer. If I had a precision micrometer, that would be a different story. But again, I'm very, very impressed by how these rings look, feel, and so far perform. But let me put these on a rail and show you what they look like when they're all mounted up. Got one of them on there. This is not tight. There's a little bit of play on the pick slot, but again, not every pick rail is the same. So there has to be a little bit of movement in there, but even though this is not shifting side to side, it shifts forward and back quite easily, again, because this is really well machined. And that is what it looks like on a rail. Very nice profile to it. It's not too wide on one side as opposed to the other. It's very slim and sleek. But now let's see what a scope looks like inside of it. with the bases mounted up to a pick rail. Oh, is this the Primary Arms PLX-C second focal plane Nova? You are absolutely right. A couple of marks on this from me putting it inside other sets of rings so far, but let's put that down. It's in there pretty snug. Can you still adjust it? Yes, you can. I'm sure it's going to be wearing on the anodizing of the scope, but let's try to get this. Actually, that's pretty dang level. Go put the caps on there and see what it looks like. I got just the one in the back torqued down. Oh, again, by the way, if you didn't know how to torque these down in sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4. Wonderful setup. And boy, howdy, does that look really, really slick. Gorgeous. Anyway, enough about looking at the rings. Let's see if they are good enough to be torqued into position, removed, and then retorqued back if they will maintain a 0. All right, we are down here looking through the SWFA Fixed 16X with the DiscoveryOpt Precision 7075 aluminum rings. As you can see, I picked one of the smaller dots down there because these are precision rings, so they should be fairly precise rings as far as getting reset. Is this important? Well, if you have a good setup and you have to take down the rifle for whatever reason, it would be nice to know that if you pulled your rings off of the rail and then threw it back on top in the correct position and you torqued it in the correct sequence that you do every single time, it's great to know that it will actually return to 0 and you shouldn't have to worry much, if at all, about losing your 0. So I already torqued down the caps, I torqued down the bases, everything has been torqued and retorqued and confirmed 0 on my scope. What I'm going to do is loosen up the 2 inside screws, then the 2 outside screws. Then when I retorque it, I'm going to snug up the 2 inside, front, rear, front, rear. Then I'm going to torque them down, front, rear, front, rear. I'm going to do it 3 times and see where it lands. As of right now, you can very clearly see we are dead center on that small little circle at, what is that, 3 mils and 1 mil over from what my usual 0 is. So without further ado, I'm going to come to the middle, loosen this up. Outside, loosen it up. You can see the scope is very loose. I'm going to push forward, which is what you should do. Inside, middle, snug. And then torque. You'll see this before I do. That is an absolutely perfect performance. I want to speed up the rest until we get to where I have to be, which is a total of 3. So without further ado, torquing these to 30 inch-pounds. That is absolutely dead nuts perfect. Loosening the middle. 3 for 3, ladies and gentlemen. That is an absolutely perfect performance. I'm impressed by these rings. Not only do they look really good, they're machined really well, and they return to 0 perfectly fine without issues. I found no issues with these rings whatsoever. There were a couple marks on the PLX-C tube after I put them in the rings and spun them around and torqued this one down, but it was just normal wear that you'd normally see. In fact, sometimes you wouldn't even see it because the fact that these aren't anodized on the inside, the aluminum is much more marking to anodizing as opposed to anodizing on anodizing sometimes. But for the many of you out there that would go, oh, well, you know, you have to lap rings no matter what to have it be super precise. Well, that's another good point on these. Because they're not anodized on the inside, if you did decide to lap these to mate to your rail, then you don't have to worry about going through the anodizing. You're already on bare aluminum, so that's another plus for that. No, I do not have the indicators to actually put in between rings or mounts to see if they do properly line up. But I've never had an issue where I damaged a scope tube before on anything, with the exception of the PRI or PLL gator mount, where the side QD lever smacks into the side of the tube and dented the tube. But that was just a one-time deal. I've never had issues other than that. But again, if you are the type of person that is going to lap a set of rings anyway, Why buy a $200 set of rings when you could lap a $50 set of rings and not have to worry about going through the anodizing again? I really like these, I really do like these. And I think, again, if you're on a much lower budget for building something of a precision nature, instead of going with a Vortex equivalent ring of the $50 price variety where I have had anodizing crack on some of those, you can get yourself a set of these in whatever height you need, whatever bore diameter you need for your tube, and have a really smartly developed ring that frankly should cost a lot more than it does. A huge thank you to Discovery Optics for sending these in for review. I will be keeping these. These will be going on a build of mine in the future, I can guarantee you. And do I foresee there being a problem with them? Not in the slightest. Anyway, a huge thank you to all of you for staying tuned. I really do appreciate it. Thank you all very much for watching. And as always, see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe Stars subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.